Clara Reynolds had never imagined that wanting a baby would be the easy part. She sat in the fertility clinic waiting room, her hands folded in her lap, trying to ignore the churning anxiety in her stomach. Across from her, Fletcher Banks looked impossibly calm, one ankle crossed over his knee, his tailored charcoal suit somehow making him look both entirely out of place and completely at home in this sterile space. He caught her staring and reached over to squeeze her hand. "We'll figure this out," he said quietly, his dark eyes steady on hers. Clara managed a smile, though it felt wobbly. 6 months ago, she'd been a wedding photographer with a successful small business and a comfortable life. She hadn't been looking for love, and she definitely hadn't been looking for Fletcher Banks, billionaire real estate developer and one of the most eligible bachelors in the city. But love had found them anyway, in the most unexpected way possible. They'd met at a wedding she was photographing, a lavish affair at one of the city's most exclusive venues. Fletcher had been the best man, and she'd been trying to orchestrate the wedding party for photos when he'd stepped in to help wrangle the groomsmen, who were already 3 drinks past tipsy. He'd made her laugh with his dry commentary about wedding traditions, and when he'd asked for her number, she'd hesitated only because she'd made it a rule never to date clients or anyone connected to her work. But Fletcher had been persistent in the most charming way possible. He'd tracked down her business email and sent her a message that was both professional and flirtatious, asking if she'd consider photographing a charity gala his company was hosting. She'd agreed, thinking it would be a one-time job. Instead, they'd spent the entire evening stealing glances at each other across the ballroom, and when the event ended, he'd finally asked her to dinner. "Just dinner," he'd said with a grin that made her heart skip. "No cameras, no work, just you and me." That dinner had turned into a whirlwind romance. Fletcher had been unlike any man she'd dated before. He was confident without being arrogant, successful without being pretentious, and he had a way of making her feel like she was the only person in the room when they were together. Within 3 months, they'd moved in together. Within 5, they were engaged, and then Clara had brought up the idea of starting a family. She'd expected Fletcher to want to wait, to suggest they enjoy being married for a few years first. But instead, his face had lit up with genuine excitement. "I want that too," he'd said, pulling her close. "I want everything with you." They'd started trying right away, both of them caught up in the excitement and romance of it all. But month after month passed with negative pregnancy tests, and what had started as an adventure had slowly transformed into something more stressful. After 4 months of disappointment, Fletcher had suggested they see a specialist, and Clara had agreed, though part of her had hoped they just needed more time. Now, sitting in this waiting room, Clara felt the weight of all those negative tests pressing down on her. What if something was wrong? What if she couldn't give Fletcher the family he wanted, Miss Reynolds, Mr. Banks? A nurse appeared in the doorway, clipboard in hand. "Dr. Martinez will see you now." Fletcher stood first, offering Clara his hand. She took it, grateful for his steady presence as they followed the nurse down a hallway to a consultation room. Dr. Martinez was a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and an efficient manner that put Clara somewhat at ease. "Thank you both for coming in," she said as they settled into chairs across from her desk. "I've reviewed all the tests we ran last week, and I have some information to share with you." Clara's heart hammered in her chest. Fletcher's hand found hers again, his grip warm and reassuring. "The good news is that there's nothing seriously wrong with either of you," Dr. Martinez continued. "However, Clara, your hormone levels indicate that you have what we call diminished ovarian reserve. It doesn't mean you can't get pregnant naturally, but it does mean that your chances are lower than average for your age, and the window is narrower." Clara felt like all the air had left the room. She was only 28 years old. This wasn't supposed to be happening yet. "What are our options?" Fletcher asked, his voice steady even though Clara could hear the tension underneath. Dr. Martinez outlined several possibilities, from continuing to try naturally while monitoring Clara's cycles more closely, to more aggressive interventions like IVF. By the time they left the office 40 minutes later, Clara's head was spinning with information and possibilities and fears she hadn't known she had. They drove home in Fletcher's car, a sleek black sedan that normally made Clara feel pampered, but today just felt like another reminder of the gap between their worlds. Fletcher was a billionaire who could afford any treatment, any option. Money wasn't an obstacle for them the way it would be for so many other couples facing fertility struggles. But all the money in the world couldn't guarantee them a baby, and that realization sat heavy in Clara's chest. "Talk to me," Fletcher said as they pulled into the underground parking garage of his downtown penthouse. Their home now, she reminded herself, though she still sometimes felt like a visitor in this gleaming world of marble and floor-to-ceiling windows. "I don't know what to say," Clara admitted. "I feel like my body is already failing us before we even really started." Fletcher turned off the engine and shifted in his seat to face her fully. "Hey, look at me," she did, meeting those dark eyes that had first caught her attention across a crowded wedding reception. "This isn't failure," he said firmly. "This is just information. We know what we're dealing with now and we can make informed decisions. Together. But what if it doesn't work? What if we try everything and I still can't get pregnant?" Fletcher reached out to cup her face in his hand, his thumb brushing away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. "Then we'll figure out our next step. Adoption, surrogacy, or maybe it'll just be the two of us. Whatever happens, we're in this together. You're not alone in this, Clara." She wanted to believe him, wanted to let his certainty anchor her. But a small, insidious voice in the back of her mind whispered that he could have any woman he wanted, that he deserved someone who could give him a family without all this struggle and uncertainty. As if reading her mind, Fletcher leaned forward and kissed her softly. "I chose you," he said against her lips. "Not your ovaries, not your fertility, not your ability to have babies. You, whatever comes next, we face it together." Clara nodded, blinking back more tears. "Okay." They went upstairs to the penthouse, and Clara was grateful when Fletcher suggested ordering in dinner rather than going out. She wasn't ready to put on a brave face for the world yet. While Fletcher called in their order to her favorite Thai restaurant, Clara changed out of her work clothes into comfortable leggings and one of Fletcher's oversized sweaters that she'd basically claimed as her own. Her phone buzzed with a text from her best friend Mia, asking how the appointment went. Clara stared at the message for a long moment before typing back a simple response. "Complicated. We'll call you tomorrow." She didn't have the energy to explain everything tonight, to hear the well-meaning reassurances and optimistic platitudes. She just wanted to be with Fletcher and try to process what this meant for their future. Over dinner, they talked about other things. Fletcher told her about a new development project his company was working on, transforming an old industrial area into mixed-use space with affordable housing units. His passion for creating spaces where communities could thrive was one of the things she loved most about him. He wasn't just interested in making money, he genuinely wanted to make a positive impact. "I've been thinking," Fletcher said as they cleared away the takeout containers. "Maybe we should take a break from actively trying for a while. Just let the pressure off and enjoy being engaged, planning our wedding, living our lives." Clara considered this. Part of her wanted to argue, to say they should dive into treatment right away before time ran out. But another part of her recognized the wisdom in his suggestion. The last few months had been consumed by ovulation trackers and scheduled intimacy, and the crushing disappointment of each negative test. Maybe they both needed to step back and remember why they'd wanted to start this journey in the first place. "Maybe you're right," she said slowly. "Though I don't know if I can stop thinking about it completely." "I'm not asking you to stop thinking about it," Fletcher said, wrapping his arms around her from behind as she stood at the sink. "Just asking if we can stop letting it consume everything. We fell in love so fast, and then we jumped right into trying for a baby. Maybe we need to give ourselves permission to just be a couple for a little while." Clara leaned back against his chest, feeling the solid warmth of him. "When did you get so wise?" "I have my moments," he said with a hint of amusement in his voice. "Besides, I have a vested interest in keeping my fiancé happy and sane." That night, they made love slowly, without the clinical precision that had crept into their intimacy over the past months. Fletcher took his time, his hands and mouth relearning every curve of her body, and Clara let herself get lost in the sensation of being wanted for herself, not for her potential to carry his child. Afterwards, wrapped in his arms with the city lights twinkling beyond their bedroom windows, she felt something inside her chest begin to unknot. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "I love you too," Fletcher replied, pressing a kiss to her temple. "We're going to be okay, Clara. I promise." The next few weeks settled into a new rhythm. Clara threw herself into her photography business, booking several spring weddings and a corporate event for one of the city's largest law firms. Fletcher was busy with his development projects, often working late into the evening. They made time for each other, though, having dinner together most nights and spending lazy Sunday mornings in bed reading the paper and drinking coffee. Clara did her best to push thoughts of babies and fertility to the back of her mind, but it was harder than she'd anticipated. Everywhere she looked, she saw pregnant women and babies. Her social media feed seemed to explode with pregnancy announcements and newborn photos. At the weddings she photographed, she found herself lingering on shots of children dancing or flower girls giggling, imagining what her own child might look like. One evening in early October, Clara was editing photos in her home office when Fletcher appeared in the doorway with 2 glasses of wine. "Thought you could use a break," he said, handing her one. Clara saved her work and gratefully accepted the glass, taking a sip of the crisp white wine. "Thank you. I've been staring at these photos so long they're all starting to blur together." Fletcher leaned against her desk, his tie loosened and his sleeves rolled up. Even disheveled from a long day of work, he was unfairly handsome. "How's the Myers wedding looking?" "Gorgeous." The venue was stunning and the couple was so in love. Those are always the easiest to photograph. Clara scrolled through some of her favorite shots, showing Fletcher the golden hour portraits she'd captured of the bride and groom. "You're incredibly talented," Fletcher said, and there was such genuine admiration in his voice that Clara felt herself blush. "I got lucky with the lighting." "No, you made the lighting work for you. There's a difference." Fletcher set down his wine glass and pulled her to her feet. "Dance with me. There's no music. Then we'll make our own." He pulled out his phone and queued up a slow song, setting it on the desk before drawing Clara into his arms. They swayed together in the soft glow of her office lamp, and Clara felt some of the tension she'd been carrying in her shoulders begin to melt away. This was what she needed to focus on, she told herself. This connection, this love, this partnership, everything else would fall into place. "I've been thinking about our wedding," Fletcher said after a moment. "What if we moved it up?" Clara pulled back slightly to look at him. "Moved it up? We're not even supposed to get married until next summer." "I know, but why wait? Let's get married this winter." Something small and intimate, just our closest friends and family. Fletcher, I photograph weddings for a living. I know how much planning goes into them. We can't just throw something together in a few months. We can if we keep it simple. I don't need a huge production, Clara. I just want to marry you. His eyes were intense on hers, and she could see he was serious about this. Clara's mind raced through the logistics. They'd originally planned a summer wedding with about 150 guests at a historic mansion outside the city. But if they scaled back, if they made it more intimate? What brought this on? She asked. Fletcher was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. These past few weeks, stepping back from the pressure of trying to get pregnant, I've realized how much I just want to be married to you. I want to call you my wife. I want to start our life together officially, whether or not kids are part of that picture right now. Clara felt tears prick her eyes again. She seemed to cry so easily these days. You really mean that? Every word. Fletcher kissed her softly. So what do you say? Want to marry me sooner rather than later? A smile spread across Clara's face, the first genuinely carefree smile she'd felt in weeks. Yes, let's do it. They spent the rest of the evening making plans, getting caught up in the excitement of it all. They decided on a winter wedding in December, just 2 months away. They'd keep it to 50 guests and hold it at a boutique hotel that Fletcher knew the owner of. Clara would wear a simple but elegant dress, and they'd focus on making the whole event feel warm and intimate rather than grand and showy. My mother is going to lose her mind that we're not doing a big society wedding, Fletcher said with a grimace. Clara had met Fletcher's parents twice, and both times had been somewhat intimidating. Richard and Patricia Banks were old money, the kind of people who summered in the Hamptons and had their names on museum wings. They'd been polite to Clara, but clearly had reservations about their son marrying a small business owner he'd known for less than a year. Will they be upset? Clara asked, worry creeping into her voice. Probably, but they'll get over it. This is our wedding, our life. They don't get a vote. Fletcher's tone was firm, and Clara was reminded that, beneath his polished exterior, he had a core of steel. He was a man who knew his own mind and didn't bend to pressure, even from his family. The next morning, Clara called Mia to share the news. Her best friend squealed so loudly that Clara had to hold the phone away from her ear. 2 months, Clara, that's insane. That's also perfect. Oh my God, we have so much to do. Mia had been Clara's best friend since college, and she was going to be the maid of honor. She was also the most organized person Clara knew, which was going to be essential for pulling off a wedding in such a short time frame. I know it's fast, Clara said, but it feels right. We don't want to wait anymore. I love it. And honestly, intimate weddings are so much more meaningful anyway. Tell me everything. What's the vision? They talked for an hour, Clara describing her ideas for a winter wonderland theme with lots of candles and greenery and twinkling lights. Mia immediately started making lists and suggested they go dress shopping that weekend. Fletcher, meanwhile, was dealing with his parents' reaction. Clara only heard his side of the phone conversation, but it was clear that Patricia Banks was not thrilled about the change in plans. Mother, it's our decision, Fletcher said firmly. Clara and I want something more intimate. Yes, I understand you've already told your friends about the summer wedding. Then you'll have to untell them. No, we're not pregnant. That's really none of your business, but no, that's not why we're moving it up. Clara cringed, able to imagine exactly what his mother was implying. She knew the Banks family had their concerns about the relationship moving so fast, and apparently they thought an unplanned pregnancy was the explanation. I love her, and I want to marry her sooner rather than later. It's that simple, Fletcher continued. I hope you and Dad will be there, but if you can't support our decision, then we'll miss you. There was more back and forth, but eventually Fletcher hung up with a heavy sigh. Well, that went about as well as expected. I'm sorry, Clara said, coming over to wrap her arms around him. Don't be. They'll come around, and if they don't, that's their problem, not ours. He kissed the top of her head. Nothing is going to ruin this for us. The next 2 months flew by in a blur of planning and preparation. Clara found a dress at a small boutique. A stunning ivory gown with delicate lace sleeves and a flowing skirt that made her feel like a winter princess. Mia helped coordinate with the hotel, the caterers, and the florist while Clara managed the photographer situation, ultimately hiring a colleague she trusted to capture their day since she definitely couldn't photograph her own wedding. Fletcher handled the guest list and invitations, managing the delicate politics of which business associates to include and which to politely exclude. His parents eventually came around, though Patricia made it clear she thought they were making a mistake rushing into things. Clara tried not to let it bother her, focusing instead on the excitement in her own parents' voices when she told them the news. Sarah and Tom Reynolds were both teachers who lived in a modest house upstate. They'd been together for 35 years and had the kind of warm, comfortable relationship that Clara had always aspired to. They adored Fletcher and were thrilled about the wedding, though Clara's mother had pulled her aside during a recent visit with a concerned look. "Honey, is everything okay? You seem stressed." Clara had considered confiding in her mother about the fertility struggles, but something held her back. Maybe it was pride, or maybe she just wasn't ready to share something so personal when they were still figuring it out themselves. "Just busy with work and wedding planning," Clara had said with what she hoped was a convincing smile. "I'm fine, Mom. Really." As December approached, Clara found herself caught between excitement about the wedding and a lingering sadness about the baby situation. She and Fletcher had stuck to their agreement about taking a break from actively trying, but that didn't mean Clara had stopped hoping. Each month, she found herself paying attention to her body, wondering if maybe this time would be different. And each month, her period arrived right on schedule, bringing with it a fresh wave of disappointment. She didn't talk to Fletcher about it, not wanting to break the fragile peace they'd found. But sometimes she'd catch him looking at children when they were out, and she'd wonder if he was thinking the same things she was, if he was mourning the family they didn't have yet. A week before the wedding, Clara had a breakdown. It started innocuously enough. She was at the salon getting her hair and makeup trial done when the stylist, a chatty woman named Veronica, started talking about her own wedding and how she'd gotten pregnant on her honeymoon. "Best surprise ever," Veronica said as she pinned up sections of Clara's hair. "My husband and I weren't even trying, but I guess the universe had other plans. Now we have 3 kids and another on the way." Clara made appropriate congratulatory noises, but inside she felt something crack. By the time she left the salon an hour later, she was barely holding it together. She made it to her car before the tears started, and once they began, she couldn't stop them. She cried for all the negative pregnancy tests, for the diagnosis that had changed everything, for the fear that she'd never get to experience what so many other women took for granted. She cried for the guilt she felt about not being able to give Fletcher what he wanted, and for the anger at her own body for not cooperating. When her phone rang 20 minutes later and Fletcher's name appeared on the screen, she almost didn't answer. But she knew he'd worry if she didn't, so she took a shaky breath and accepted the call. "Hey, how did the hair trial go?" Fletcher's voice was warm and upbeat. Clara tried to respond, but what came out was a choked sob. "Clara, baby, what's wrong?" His tone immediately shifted to concern. "I can't do this," Clara managed to get out between sobs. "I can't walk down the aisle and promise you forever when I can't even give you a baby." "Where are you?" Fletcher demanded. "Are you driving? Pull over right now. I'm in the salon parking lot. Stay there. I'm coming to you." She heard muffled sounds on his end, him clearly leaving wherever he was and moving quickly. "Talk to me." "What happened?" Clara told him about the stylist and her easy pregnancy and how it had triggered something inside her. "Everyone can get pregnant except me," she said miserably. "It's not fair, Fletcher. I feel so broken." "You are not broken," Fletcher said fiercely. "Clara Reynolds, you are the strongest, most incredible woman I've ever met, and I need you to listen to me right now." "Are you listening?" "Yes," Clara whispered. "I don't care if we never have children." "Do you hear me? I don't care. What I care about is spending my life with you, waking up next to you every morning, coming home to you every night. You are enough, Clara. You have always been enough." Clara pressed her free hand to her mouth, trying to muffle another sob. "But you want kids. You said you wanted everything." "I do want everything, and everything to me is you. If we have kids, that will be amazing. If we don't, we'll build a different kind of life together, and it will be just as amazing. But I can't do any of it without you." By the time Fletcher arrived at the parking lot 15 minutes later, Clara had cried herself out and was left feeling wrung out but somehow lighter. He climbed into her passenger seat and immediately pulled her into his arms. "I'm sorry," she mumbled against his chest. "I don't know where that came from. You've been holding it in," Fletcher said gently. "We said we'd take the pressure off, but that didn't make the feelings go away. We should have talked about this more. I didn't want to burden you with it." Fletcher pulled back to look at her, his hands framing her face. "Clara, you could never be a burden to me. Your pain is my pain. Your struggles are my struggles. That's what partnership means." They sat in her car for another half hour, really talking for the first time in weeks about their fears and hopes around starting a family. Fletcher admitted that he'd been struggling too, that he felt helpless watching her hurt and not being able to fix it. Clara confessed that she'd been afraid that if she couldn't give him children, he'd eventually regret choosing her. "Never," Fletcher said with absolute certainty. "I chose you because I love you, all of you. Not some fantasy version, not some perfect version. You exactly as you are." When they finally drove home separately, Clara felt like a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. They should have had this conversation weeks ago, should have been honest about their feelings instead of trying to pretend everything was fine. But they were having it now, and that was what mattered. The wedding day arrived with a fresh blanket of snow that made the city look like something out of a fairy tale. Clara woke up early in the hotel suite. She was sharing with Mia and her mother, feeling nervous and excited in equal measure. "How are you feeling, sweetie?" her mother asked, bringing her a cup of coffee. "Good," Clara said, and realized she meant it. "Really good." The morning passed in a flurry of activity as Mia orchestrated getting everyone ready. The photographer arrived to capture getting ready shots, and Clara's stylist came to do her hair and makeup. By the time Clara stepped into her dress, she felt like she was floating. "You look absolutely beautiful," her mother said with tears in her eyes. Mia handed Clara her bouquet, a stunning arrangement of white roses and winter greenery, and then it was time. The ceremony was being held in the hotel's library, a cozy room with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and a massive fireplace. They decorated with hundreds of candles and strands of twinkling lights, creating an intimate, magical atmosphere. Clara's father walked her down the aisle, and at the end of it stood Fletcher, looking devastating in a perfectly tailored tuxedo. But it was the expression on his face that made Clara's breath catch, the pure, unguarded love in his eyes as he watched her approach. The ceremony itself was a blur of emotion. They'd written their own vows, and when it was Fletcher's turn to speak, his voice was thick with feeling. "Clara, 6 months ago I met you at a wedding, and I knew immediately that you were special. but I had no idea just how much you would change my life. You've taught me what it means to truly love someone, to put their happiness before your own, to be vulnerable and honest and real. I promise to spend the rest of my life making you as happy as you make me. I promise to be your partner in everything, to face every challenge together, to celebrate every victory. And I promise to love you exactly as you are, today and every day forward. Clara was crying by the time he finished, and she had to take a moment to compose herself before saying her own vows. Fletcher, you walked into my life when I least expected it, and completely turned everything upside down in the best possible way. You've shown me what it means to be truly cherished, to have someone believe in me unconditionally. I promise to be your safe harbor, your biggest supporter, your partner in building whatever life we choose to create. I promise to be honest with you, to trust you with my whole heart, and to love you through whatever challenges we face. You are my home, and I can't wait to spend forever with you. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, Fletcher kissed her like they were the only two people in the world, and Clara felt every lingering doubt and fear melt away. This was right. They were right. Whatever else happened, they had this. The reception was intimate and joyful, with 50 of their closest friends and family celebrating with them. Clara danced with her father, who told her how proud he was of her. Fletcher danced with his mother, and Clara was touched to see Patricia Banks actually smiling, some of her usual reserve dropping away. During dinner, Fletcher's best friend Marcus stood to give a toast. He'd known Fletcher since college and had some embarrassing stories that made everyone laugh. But then his tone turned more serious. I've known Fletcher for 15 years, and I've never seen him like this before. Clara, you've brought out a side of him that I didn't even know existed. He's happier, more grounded, more himself with you than I've ever seen him. That's how I know this is the real deal. So here's to Fletcher and Clara, to a love that's worth celebrating, and to a lifetime of happiness together. Later, when Clara and Fletcher had their first dance, she rested her head against his chest and let herself simply be in the moment. The song was one they'd chosen together, a classic that felt both romantic and timeless. "How are you doing, Mrs. Banks?" Fletcher murmured against her hair. "Mrs. Banks," Clara repeated, trying out the sound of it. "That's going to take some getting used to. We have the rest of our lives for you to get used to it." The party continued late into the night, but eventually Clara and Fletcher slipped away to the suite the hotel had prepared for them. It was decked out with more candles and flowers, champagne chilling in a bucket, and rose petals scattered across the bed. "This is so cheesy," Clara laughed, kicking off her heels. "I know," Fletcher said, coming up behind her to start unfastening the tiny buttons running down the back of her dress. "But you love it." She did love it, loved all of it. She turned in his arms to kiss him, slow and deep, and Fletcher finished unbuttoning her dress, letting it pool at her feet. They made love slowly, tenderly, with a new sense of rightness now that they were officially married. Afterwards, wrapped in each other's arms in the plush hotel bed, Clara felt more at peace than she had in months. "I love you," she whispered. "Thank you for today, for everything." "Thank you for marrying me," Fletcher replied. "Best decision I ever made, convincing you to move up the wedding." They'd planned a honeymoon in the Caribbean, a week at a private resort where they could relax and enjoy being newlyweds. But before they left, Clara had one more thing she needed to do. 2 days after the wedding, she called Dr. Martinez's office and made an appointment. When Fletcher asked what it was for, she took a deep breath. "I want to talk about IVF. I want to know what our options are, what the process looks like, everything. I know we said we'd take the pressure off, and we have, but I'm ready now to actively try again." Not because I'm desperate or panicking, but because I want to build a family with you and I want to give us the best possible chance. Fletcher searched her face. Are you sure? I don't want you to feel like you have to do this. I'm sure. We're married now, we're solid, and I'm ready to face this head on. Whatever happens, we're in this together. Right, Fletcher agreed, pulling her into a kiss. Together. The Caribbean was exactly what they needed. 7 days of sunshine and turquoise water and nothing to do but relax and enjoy each other. They slept late, made love often, ate incredible food, and talked about everything and nothing. Clara felt tension she hadn't even realized she'd been carrying finally drain away. On their last night, they had dinner on the beach, a private table set up just for them with the waves lapping at the shore nearby. The sun was setting in brilliant shades of orange and pink, and Fletcher reached across the table to take her hand. I've been thinking about something, he said. Dangerous, Clara teased. He smiled but continued seriously. When we get back and start the IVF process, it's going to be intense. I want you to know that I'm going to be there for every appointment, every shot, every step of the way. I'm not letting you go through this alone. Clara felt tears prick her eyes again, happy tears this time. Your work schedule is crazy, though. I don't expect you to. I don't care about my work schedule. You're my priority, Clara. You and whatever family we build together. I can delegate more. I can rearrange meetings. My assistant is going to have to deal with it. I love you so much, Clara said, her voice thick with emotion. I love you too, and I meant what I said in my vows. We're partners in everything. When they returned home after the honeymoon, tanned and relaxed, Clara felt ready to face whatever came next. They met with Dr. Martinez the following week for a comprehensive consultation about IVF. The doctor explained the entire process in detail, from the hormone injections to stimulate Clara's ovaries, to the egg retrieval procedure, to the fertilization and eventual embryo transfer. Given your age and the fact that diminished ovarian reserve is your primary issue, I'm optimistic about your chances, Dr. Martinez said. The process can be physically and emotionally demanding, but you're both healthy otherwise, and that's in your favor. They decided to start the process in late January, giving Clara's body time to recover from the stress of wedding planning and allowing them to adjust to married life. The month in between felt surreal, knowing what was coming but trying not to obsess over it. Clara threw herself into her photography business, editing the backlog of photos from fall weddings and booking new clients for the spring season. Fletcher was busy with a major new project, a mixed-use development that was his most ambitious yet. But despite their busy schedules, they made time for each other, having dinner together most nights and spending weekends exploring the city or staying in and watching movies. When it was finally time to start the IVF cycle, Clara felt surprisingly calm. She'd done her research, joined online support groups, and prepared herself mentally for what was ahead. Fletcher had rearranged his schedule like he'd promised, making sure he could be home every evening for her hormone injections. The first few days were manageable. The injections were uncomfortable but not unbearable, and Clara didn't experience any major side effects. But as the dosage increased and more hormones were added to the protocol, things got harder. Her body ached, she felt bloated and emotional, and she was exhausted all the time. Fletcher was incredible through it all. He gave her the injections with steady hands, even though she could tell it pained him to cause her any discomfort. He brought her heating pads when she was cramping, made her favorite foods when she felt nauseous, and held her when she cried for no reason other than the hormones. I feel like a crazy person, Clara said one evening after bursting into tears because they were out of her favorite ice cream. You're not crazy. You're pumping your body full of hormones to try to make a baby. That's superhero-level stuff, Fletcher said, already pulling on his coat. I'm going to get you that ice cream. You don't have to. I know I don't have to. I want to. Be back in 20 minutes. Clara watched him go, overwhelmed by gratitude and love. She knew logically that not all partners were this supportive, that some women went through fertility treatments largely alone. But Fletcher had meant what he said about being there for every step, and he was proving it every single day. The egg retrieval was scheduled for mid-February, and Clara was nervous but ready to get it over with. The waiting and the hormone injections were wearing on her, and she wanted to move forward to the next phase. Fletcher took the day off work to be with her, and he was by her side when they arrived at the clinic early in the morning. "You're going to do great," he said, squeezing her hand as they waited for her to be called back. The procedure itself was quick, done under light sedation so Clara didn't feel anything. When she woke up in recovery, Fletcher was there, and Dr. Martinez came in shortly after with an update. "We retrieved 11 eggs," the doctor said with a smile. "That's a good number given your reserve. They'll be fertilized today, and we'll monitor how many develop into viable embryos over the next few days." 11 eggs. Clara felt a flicker of hope mixed with anxiety. How many would fertilize? How many would develop? There were still so many variables, so many things that could go wrong. Fletcher drove her home and got her settled on the couch with pillows and blankets, and everything she might need within reach. He'd taken the rest of the week off to take care of her, despite her protests that she'd be fine. "Stop trying to be tough," he said, bringing her soup and crackers. "Let me take care of you." Over the next few days, they waited for updates from the clinic. Of the 11 eggs retrieved, 9 had fertilized successfully. By day 3, 7 were still developing. By day 5, they had 4 strong blastocysts that were suitable for transfer or freezing. 4 embryos, Clara said, staring at the email from the clinic. "That's better than I expected." "It's great," Fletcher agreed, reading over her shoulder. "Dr. Martinez said we need at least 1 good embryo for transfer, and we have 4. They decided to transfer 1 embryo and freeze the other 3 for potential future use. The transfer was scheduled for the following week, and it was a much simpler procedure than the retrieval. No sedation required. Clara just had to have a full bladder, which was uncomfortable, and lie still while Dr. Martinez used an ultrasound to guide the embryo into her uterus. Fletcher held her hand through the whole thing, watching the ultrasound screen intently. "Is that it?" he asked when a tiny white fleck appeared on the screen. "That's it," Dr. Martinez confirmed. "That's your embryo. Now we wait and hope it implants." The 2-week wait between the transfer and the pregnancy test was the longest 2 weeks of Clara's life. She tried to stay busy, to not obsess over every twinge and sensation in her body. But it was impossible not to wonder, not to hope. Fletcher was a constant source of support, distracting her with date nights and weekend trips and long conversations about everything except fertility. But Clara could see the hope in his eyes too, the cautious optimism he was trying not to show too openly. When the day of the pregnancy test finally arrived, Clara woke up early, her stomach in knots. They had to go to the clinic for a blood test, and then they'd get the results later that afternoon. The waiting was excruciating. Clara tried to work, editing photos from a recent engagement shoot, but she couldn't concentrate. Fletcher was at the office but kept texting her encouraging messages. Mia called to check in, offering to come over and keep her company, but Clara declined. She needed to be alone with her thoughts to prepare herself for whatever news came. When her phone finally rang at 3 in the afternoon, Clara nearly dropped it in her haste to answer. "Mrs. Banks." It was Dr. Martinez's nurse, Sarah. I'm calling with your test results. Yes. Clara's heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. Congratulations. You're pregnant. Your HCG levels are at 142, which is a great number for this stage. Clara's knees went weak and she sat down hard on the couch. I'm pregnant. Really? Really? Sarah confirmed with audible warmth in her voice. We'll want you to come back in 2 days for a repeat blood test to make sure your levels are rising appropriately, and then we'll schedule your first ultrasound for around 6 weeks. After Sarah hung up, Clara sat in stunned silence for a long moment. Then she called Fletcher. He answered on the first ring. Did they call? I'm pregnant, Clara said, and then she started crying. Fletcher, it worked. I'm actually pregnant. She heard his sharp intake of breath. I'm coming home right now, don't move. You don't have to leave work, Clara. My wife just told me she's pregnant. I'm absolutely leaving work. I'll be there in 15 minutes. He made it in 12, bursting through the door and immediately pulling Clara into his arms. She was still crying, and now he was too, both of them overwhelmed by relief and joy and disbelief. We're having a baby, Fletcher said, pulling back to look at her, his hands framing her face. We're actually having a baby. I can't believe it worked on the first try, Clara said. I was so prepared for it to take multiple rounds. You did it. You were so brave through everything, and you did it. They spent the rest of the evening in a state of cautious celebration, afraid to get too excited but unable to contain their happiness. Fletcher ordered in dinner from Clara's favorite restaurant, and they toasted with sparkling cider, already practicing for the 9 months ahead when Clara wouldn't be able to drink. The next 2 days, until the follow-up blood test crawled by. Clara tried not to let herself spiral into anxiety, but she couldn't help worrying that something would go wrong, that the pregnancy wouldn't be viable. But when the results came back showing her HCG levels had risen appropriately, she finally let herself believe it was real. The first ultrasound at 6 weeks was the most nerve-wracking appointment yet. Clara lay on the exam table, Fletcher holding her hand, as Dr. Martinez moved the ultrasound wand and peered at the screen. There we go, the doctor said with a smile, turning the monitor so they could see. That's your baby, and there's the heartbeat. Clara stared at the screen, at the tiny flicker that represented her baby's heartbeat, and felt her own heart expand with a love so fierce it took her breath away. Beside her, Fletcher was openly crying, his grip on her hand almost painful. The baby looks perfect, Dr. Martinez continued. Measuring right on track for 6 weeks, everything looks exactly as it should. They left the clinic with ultrasound photos and a sense of wonder that carried them through the next few weeks. Clara still didn't quite believe it was real, kept waiting for something to go wrong. But each week that passed, each milestone reached, made the pregnancy feel more solid. They waited until after the 12-week mark to start telling people, wanting to get through the first trimester before going public. Clara's morning sickness was brutal, and she spent most mornings hunched over the toilet while Fletcher held her hair back and rubbed her back. I'm sorry, she said miserably after a particularly bad morning. This is so gross. This is you growing our baby, Fletcher corrected. Nothing about that could ever be gross to me. When they finally told their families, the reactions were everything they could have hoped for. Clara's parents cried happy tears, and even Fletcher's usually reserved mother showed genuine excitement, already talking about setting up a nursery in their home for visits. Mia screamed so loudly when Clara told her that Fletcher could hear it from across the room. I'm going to be an aunt. Well, honorary aunt, but still. Oh my God, Clara, I'm so happy for you. Work became more challenging as Clara's pregnancy progressed. She was constantly exhausted, and by the second trimester, her growing belly made it harder to crouch and move around during photo shoots. but she loved her job too much to cut back, and Fletcher supported her decision to keep working as long as she felt up to it. "Just promise me you'll take care of yourself," he said. "The business will survive if you need to slow down." At the 20-week ultrasound, they found out they were having a girl. Clara watched Fletcher's face light up when the technician announced it, and she fell in love with him all over again. "A daughter," he said wonderingly on the drive home. "We're having a daughter." They spent that evening lying in bed, Fletcher's hand on Clara's belly, talking about names and nursery themes and all the dreams they had for their little girl. It felt surreal and perfect, and like everything Clara had ever wanted. But pregnancy after fertility struggles carried its own unique anxiety. Every appointment, Clara worried something would be wrong. Every day she didn't feel the baby move as much, she panicked. Fletcher learned to talk her down from her spirals of worry, to remind her that the doctors said everything was progressing perfectly. In her third trimester, Clara finally slowed down on work, cutting back to only a few select bookings. Her body was tired, her back ached constantly, and she spent most of her time either on the couch or in bed. Fletcher worked from home as much as possible, wanting to be nearby in case she needed anything. They finished the nursery in early August, painting it a soft sage green and filling it with carefully chosen furniture and decorations. Clara's mother had made a quilt for the baby, and it hung over the crib, a tangible symbol of the love already surrounding their daughter. "We still need to decide on a name," Fletcher said one evening as they stood in the doorway of the nursery, admiring their work. They'd been debating names for months, unable to agree on the perfect one. Clara wanted something classic but not too common. Fletcher wanted something that would sound good with Banks as a last name. "What about Sophie?" Clara suggested. "Sophie Rose Banks." Fletcher considered this, his arm around her waist. "Sophie, I like it. Sophie Rose. Is that it then? Is that her name?" "I think so," Fletcher said, leaning down to press a kiss to Clara's temple. "Welcome to the world, Sophie Rose. We can't wait to meet you." Clara went into labor 2 days before her due date, her water breaking in the middle of the night. Fletcher remained remarkably calm, gathering their hospital bag and helping her to the car while timing her contractions. Clara, on the other hand, was terrified. "What if something goes wrong?" she said as they drove through empty city streets. "What if after everything, something happens at the last minute?" "Nothing is going to go wrong," Fletcher said firmly. "You've done amazing so far, and you're going to do amazing now. Sophie is going to be here soon, and she's going to be perfect." Labor was long and difficult. 22 hours of contractions, of pain that Clara hadn't known was possible, of Fletcher never leaving her side even when she screamed at him during particularly intense moments. He held her hand, fed her ice chips, breathed with her through contractions, and told her over and over that she could do this. And finally, Sophie Rose Banks entered the world with a lusty cry that made both her parents burst into tears. The nurse placed her on Clara's chest, and Clara looked down at her daughter's tiny, scrunched-up face and felt a love so overwhelming it was almost frightening. "She's perfect," Fletcher whispered, his hand cradling Sophie's tiny head. "Clara, she's absolutely perfect." The first few weeks with Sophie were harder than Clara had anticipated. She was exhausted and overwhelmed, her body still recovering from labor while trying to figure out how to care for this tiny, demanding person. But Fletcher was there through it all, taking night shifts so Clara could sleep, changing diapers, walking Sophie around the apartment when she cried. "I couldn't do this without you," Clara said one night when she'd woken up to feed Sophie and found Fletcher already in the nursery, rocking their daughter and singing softly. "Yes, you could," Fletcher said, but he smiled. "But you don't have to. That's the point." As the weeks turned into months, they settled into their new life as parents. Clara slowly started taking on photography jobs again, though she was much more selective now about what she booked. Fletcher had hired a nanny to help during the days when Clara was working, but he still made sure to be home for dinner most nights and took over completely on weekends. Sophie grew from a tiny newborn into a chubby, smiling baby who had Fletcher wrapped around her tiny finger. Clara would often find them together, Fletcher talking to Sophie like she could understand every word, telling her about his day, or reading her bored books with great dramatic flair. "You're going to spoil her," Clara said one Saturday morning, watching Fletcher carefully select the perfect outfit for Sophie from the overflowing closet of baby clothes. "That's my prerogative as her father," Fletcher replied, completely unrepentant. "Besides, look at this face. How could anyone not spoil her?" On their first wedding anniversary, Fletcher arranged for his mother to watch Sophie so he could take Clara out for a special dinner. It was the first time they'd been out alone since Sophie was born, and Clara felt both excited and anxious about leaving her baby. "She'll be fine," Fletcher assured her for the 10th time as they drove to the restaurant. "My mother raised me, didn't she?" "That's not exactly reassuring," Clara teased, and Fletcher laughed. Dinner was at the same restaurant where they'd had their first date, and Clara was touched that Fletcher had remembered and thought to book it. Over wine for him and water for her, since she was still breastfeeding, they talked about everything that had happened in the past year. "A year ago, I married you in that library with candles everywhere," Fletcher said, reaching across the table to take her hand. "And I thought I knew what love was. But this year, watching you become a mother, seeing you with Sophie, I've learned there are depths to love I didn't even know existed." Clara felt tears prick her eyes. "I was so scared we wouldn't get here. All those months of trying, I was terrified it wouldn't work. But it did work. And even if it hadn't, even if Sophie had never happened, I would still have you, and that would have been enough." "It wouldn't have been easy, though," Clara said honestly. "I don't know if I would have been able to accept it, to be okay with just the two of us." "Maybe not at first," Fletcher agreed, "but we would have figured it out together. That's what we do. We face things together, and we come out stronger on the other side." Clara thought about that, about everything they'd been through in their relatively short relationship. The whirlwind romance, the fertility struggles, the decision to move up their wedding, the IVF process, the pregnancy, and now parenthood. It had been intense and challenging and sometimes overwhelming, but Fletcher was right. They'd faced it all together, and every challenge had only strengthened their bond. "I love you," Clara said, squeezing his hand. "Thank you for being my partner through everything." "Always," Fletcher promised, "for the rest of our lives." When Sophie was 6 months old, Clara and Fletcher started talking about having another baby. They still had 3 frozen embryos, and they both wanted Sophie to have a sibling close in age. But they decided to wait until Sophie was at least a year old before starting the process again, wanting to enjoy this stage and give Clara's body more time to recover. Meanwhile, life continued to unfold in beautiful, ordinary ways. Sophie hit all her milestones, started sleeping through the night, began eating solid foods. Clara's photography business continued to thrive, and she'd started specializing in family photography, finding that she had a new appreciation for capturing those fleeting moments of childhood. Fletcher's development company completed the mixed-use project he'd been working on, and the affordable housing units were already making a difference in the community. He'd found a balance between his demanding career and his family life, and Clara could see how much fulfillment he got from both. On Sophie's first birthday, they threw a party in the penthouse, inviting both their families and close friends. Clara had made a smash cake for Sophie, and watching her daughter dig into the frosting with pure joy on her face, Clara felt a contentment she'd never known before. Later that evening, after everyone had left and Sophie was asleep in her crib, Clara and Fletcher sat on their balcony overlooking the city lights. "Remember when we sat out here and talked about starting a family?" Fletcher said, his arm around Clara's shoulders. "I remember being terrified it would never happen," Clara said. "And now look at us, we have everything we dreamed of." "Not everything," Fletcher said, and when Clara looked at him questioningly, he smiled. "We haven't used those other 3 embryos yet," Clara laughed. "Are you ready for another one already?" "Maybe not right this second," Fletcher admitted. "But soon. I want Sophie to have siblings, want our home to be full of kids and noise and chaos." "That sounds perfect," Clara agreed, leaning her head on his shoulder. They did start the process for another embryo transfer when Sophie was 14 months old, and this time it felt less fraught with anxiety. They knew what to expect, knew their bodies could do this. The transfer was successful, and 9 months later they welcomed twin boys, James and Lucas, into their family. Life with 3 kids under 3 was chaotic and exhausting and absolutely wonderful. Clara cut back even more on work, doing only the occasional photo shoot when the nanny was available. Fletcher had promoted one of his vice presidents to handle more of the day-to-day operations, so he could have more flexibility with his schedule. Their penthouse felt too small now with 3 children, so they bought a house in the suburbs with a big backyard and a neighborhood full of other young families. Clara's parents helped them move, and she could see how happy they were to have their grandchildren nearby. Fletcher's parents had softened considerably since Sophie's birth, and Patricia Banks was now a doting grandmother who came by frequently with gifts and offers to babysit. She'd apologized to Clara for her initial reservations about the marriage, admitting that she'd been wrong to doubt them. "You've made my son happier than I've ever seen him," Patricia said during one visit, "and you've given us these beautiful grandchildren. I'm sorry I didn't see it from the beginning." "Water under the bridge," Clara said warmly, watching Patricia play with the twins. "We're family now." As the years passed, Clara and Fletcher's love continued to deepen and evolve. They had their challenges, of course. 3 kids meant less time for just the 2 of them, less spontaneous romance, more exhaustion and logistics. But they made it work, prioritizing date nights and stolen moments of connection. Sophie grew into a precocious, artistic child who loved helping Clara with photography. The twins were wild and energetic, keeping everyone on their toes. And through it all, Clara and Fletcher remained each other's anchor, the steady foundation that made everything else possible. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Fletcher arranged for all 3 kids to stay with Clara's parents for the weekend, so they could have 2 full days alone together. They went back to the Caribbean resort where they'd honeymooned, and it felt like coming full circle. 5 years, Clara said as they lay on the beach, the sun warm on their skin. "Can you believe it's only been 5 years? It feels like a lifetime." "The best lifetime," Fletcher said, turning his head to look at her. "Do you ever regret how fast everything moved? We went from meeting to married to trying for a baby all within a year." Clara thought about it honestly. "No," she said finally. "I mean, it was intense, and there were times I was terrified, but I don't regret any of it. Every step led us here to this life we've built together. Even the hard parts, the fertility struggles, especially the hard parts," Clara said, rolling onto her side to face him. "That struggle showed me who you really were, showed me that you meant it when you said we were partners. If everything had been easy, I might never have seen how deep your commitment runs." Fletcher reached out to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear. "The title was right then." "What title?" "If someone were writing a story about us, They'd call it "She tried for baby with Billionaire," unaware the struggle would strengthen their love. Because it did, didn't it? Strengthen us. Clara laughed at the melodramatic phrasing, but she knew he was right. It absolutely did. We went through fire together, and we came out on the other side stronger. They spent the rest of the weekend reconnecting, remembering what it was like to just be Clara and Fletcher, not Mom and Dad. They made love without worrying about being interrupted, had long conversations about their dreams for the future, and simply enjoyed each other's company. When they returned home to 3 excited children who'd missed them, Clara felt refreshed and renewed, ready for whatever came next. More years passed in a blur of school plays and soccer games, birthday parties and family vacations. Sophie started elementary school, then the twins. Clara's photography business evolved into teaching workshops and mentoring other photographers. Fletcher scaled back his work even more, taking a more advisory role at his company so he could be more present for his family. They were happy. Not in a perfect fairy tale way, but in the real, messy, beautiful way that came from 2 people choosing each other every single day. They still had their struggles, their arguments, their moments of frustration and exhaustion. But underneath it all was a foundation of love and partnership that had been forged in the crucible of their fertility journey and only grown stronger with time. On their 10th wedding anniversary, they renewed their vows in a small ceremony in their backyard, surrounded by their children and closest friends and family. Sophie, now 9 years old, read a poem she'd written about love. The twins, 7 years old and squirmy in their little suits, managed to stand still long enough for the brief ceremony. When it was time for their vows, Clara spoke from the heart. 10 years ago, I married you in a library full of candles, and I promised to love you through whatever challenges we faced. I had no idea then just how many challenges there would be, or how much joy. You've been my partner through fertility struggles and pregnancy and parenthood. You've been my rock when I was falling apart and my biggest cheerleader when I was succeeding. You've loved me exactly as I am, and you've helped me become the best version of myself. I promise to keep choosing you, keep loving you, keep building this beautiful life with you for the next 10 years and beyond. Fletcher's vows were equally heartfelt, and by the time they kissed to seal their renewed commitment, there wasn't a dry eye in the backyard. Later that night, after the kids were in bed and the last of their guests had left, Clara and Fletcher slow danced in their living room to the same song they danced to at their wedding. You remember being in that fertility clinic waiting room? Clara asked softly. How scared I was. I remember, Fletcher said. I remember thinking I'd do anything to take away your fear and pain. You did, Clara said. Not by taking it away, but by sharing it with me, by being there for every single step. That's what made the difference. She thought about that terrified woman in the waiting room, convinced she was broken, afraid of disappointing the man she loved. She wished she could go back and tell that woman that everything was going to work out better than she could imagine. That the struggle ahead would be worth it, not just because of the children they'd have, but because of how much stronger their love would become. I love our life, Clara said, looking around at the comfortable chaos of their home. Toys scattered across the floor, artwork covering the refrigerator, photos of their family on every surface. I love our life too, Fletcher agreed. And I love you, today, tomorrow, and every day after that. As they swayed together in the dimness of their living room, Clara reflected on the journey that had brought them here. The whirlwind romance, the devastating diagnosis, the grueling fertility treatments, the joy of pregnancy, the chaos of raising 3 children. Every moment, every struggle, every triumph had woven together to create the rich tapestry of their life together. She'd been unaware that the struggle to have a baby would strengthen their love, but looking back now, she couldn't imagine it any other way. The challenges had stripped away all pretense, all superficiality, leaving only the core of who they were as individuals and as a couple. And that core had been strong enough to weather anything. Their story wasn't a fairy tale with a magical happy ending. It was better than that. It was real, with all the messiness and imperfection that came with real life. But it was theirs, built on a foundation of love and commitment and partnership that had been tested and proven true. And as Clara rested her head on Fletcher's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, she knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them the same way they'd faced everything else. Together.